world would not be the same. Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that one way or another.
Hello and welcome to another Supervillains Explored Superman edition, and today I'm going to be taking a look at another highly iconic Superman villain, which is Bizarro. That's right, Superman's #1 evil twin, or maybe not evil, but let's actually get started talking about this guy. Now, before Bizzaro was actually created, it's actually worth to note that in the pre-crisis years, long before Superman himself was even born on the planet Krypton, the Kryptonian criminal known as General Zod actually created an army of duplicates of himself, which were very similar to Bizzaro. The only difference being that since Krypton didn't have a yellow sun, they weren't given superhuman strength and abilities like they would on Earth. That's pretty much how it was for all Kryptonians, but it's worth noting that that was the crime that got General Zod banished to the Phantom Zone. But actually talking about the character of Bizzaro himself, Bizzaro first appeared in the comic Superboy number 68, if I'm correct. I may be wrong about that, but feel free to correct me if I do in fact get that wrong. But anyways, Bizzaro first appears whenever Superboy, yes, this was actually Superboy, not Superman, because in the pre-crisis comics there was an actual Superboy before he graduated to become Superman. But anyways, Superboy's meeting up with this scientist who creates this duplication ray, and he wants to test it on Superboy, figuring that, you know, 2 Superboys would be better than 1. So he fires the beam at Superboy, and thus Bizzaro is created. Now, the really sad thing about his debut is that Bizzaro inherently doesn't do anything wrong. The only thing about Bizzaro that people don't like is that whenever he was created, he was given very white, pale, chalky skin. He was very deformed and ugly and grotesque looking, and he had a sort of a big brain deficiency that caused him to use very broken grammar and sort of talk in the third person, almost like a Frankenstein-esque monster, a lot like the Boris Karloff Frankenstein monster, which was no doubt, in fact, the inspiration for Bizzaro. But anyways, Bizzaro he falls in love with this girl in Smallville, and this forces Superboy to try to kill Bizzaro using the remains of the destroyed duplication ray, which actually acts as Bizzaro's kryptonite, which in a sense that kind of makes sense, because, you know, the kryptonite is nothing more than just the destroyed remains of Superman's home planet, so it's only appropriate that the destroyed remains of the thing that actually created Bizzaro would be his weakness as well. So yeah, Bizzaro is pretty much killed after this little battle with Superboy, and many years later, when Superboy has become Superman, Lex Luthor decides to recreate the duplication ray. And this time he wants to create a Bizzaro clone that he can actually control. However, when the Bizzaro clone is recreated, he starts to become enamored with Superman, and he resists all of Lex Luthor's mental controls, and he goes on a rampage throughout the city, and he wreaks havoc, all in the name of just trying to be Superman, just trying to do what Superman would want to do. He unintentionally causes a lot of death and destruction, and on top of that, he falls in love with Lois Lane. And when Lois Lane finds out about this, she finds the duplication ray, and she uses it on herself to create a Bizarro Lois that Bizzaro can fall in love with. And so Bizzaro finally ends up happy, and wouldn't you know it, they actually end up on a planet together. Yeah, Bizzaro actually finds a distant alien world that's completely uninhabited, and he decides to create his own Bizzaro world. This is the Silver Age, people. You gotta expect silly stuff like this. The world that Bizzaro and his bride occupy is called Hot Trade, which is actually Earth spelled backwards. And Bizzaro pretty much is able to make a lackluster homemade version of the duplication ray and create an entire world population of Bizarros. What's also worth noting is that he and the Bizzaro Lois actually have a kid that looks like a normal human being, not a Bizzaro with, heavily deformed facial features and chalky white skin. Which, I guess that kind of makes sense since, all Bizarros are in a sense negative copies of their original creations, so in a sense, the original Bizzaro and the original Lois Bizzaro were two negative creations, and so I suppose in this case, two negatives would equal a positive, which is a regular human being. Again, this is the Silver Age, so there's just going to be all kinds of weird stuff like this, but there's not a whole lot more to talk about concerning the pre-crisis Bizzaro. I mean, he tries to create a Bizzaro version of Titano. He tries to join the Legion of Superheroes at one point. He also joins the Secret Society of Supervillains one time. And it's also worth noting that he actually develops special powers that are the opposite of that of Superman's, where he's able to shoot freeze beams out of his eyes as opposed to Superman, who shoots heat vision out of his eyes. But yeah, that's about all there is for the pre-crisis Bizzaro. Now let's talk about the New Earth version. There are actually two New Earth versions of Bizzaro. The first one was created by Lex Luthor at a time where Superman hadn't actually revealed to the public that he was from another planet. At the time when Luthor created Bizzaro, he did so under the assumption that Superman was simply a regular human with regular metahuman abilities granted to him by some laboratory accident or something. And thus, that's what caused Bizzaro to end up the way he was, because he was created without the knowledge that Superman was actually an alien. And so when that happened, this Bizzaro actually ended up mute, and he had a small toddler's intelligence, and he also ended up highly deformed with white skin. But he tried to live a life similar to that of Clark Kent's, but in the end his memories were far too shattered and fractured, so he tried to kidnap Lois Lane to try to get his memories back, but unfortunately he was murdered in a mid-air battle with Superman. So this Bizzaro pretty much had kind of a tragic life. I actually feel kind of sorry for him. But moving on to the next one. The third and most recurring Bizzaro in the New Earth continuity was in fact actually created by the Joker. Now, let me explain here. There was a time in the comics where the Joker somehow got a hold of the powers of Mr. Mishapitlick. The imp from the fifth dimension, the one who Superman is always fighting against. Yeah, but anyways, when the Joker seizes control of Mishapitlick's powers, he sort of tries to create the world in his own image, and he declares himself Emperor Joker. And he creates his own sick, contorted, twisted versions of the Justice League and all the Earth's superheroes. And the Superman that he creates is Bizzaro. But after that whole event with the Joker and stuff, this Bizarro was actually captured by General Zod. And no, it's not the actual Kryptonian General Zod, but it's actually a different General Zod, the Russian version of Zod, who's actually a regular human who's given really super powerful Kryptonian powers after being exposed to a rock of red kryptonite as a baby. But yeah, Superman rescues this Bizarro, and he sort of leaves him behind to sort of fend for himself. So this Bizarro sort of tries to create his own ideal world, again, that tries to mimic Superman. And since he's pretty much a lost puppy at this point, he is recruited by the secret society of supervillains. And after being insulted one time by Professor Zoom, which Bizarro perceives as being a big compliment to him, since that's pretty much how Bizarro works. If you insult him, then he sees it as a compliment, as praise. That's sort of where this whole reverse character archetype came from. But yeah, that's sort of how Bizarro became a member of the Secret Society of Supervillains. While Bizarro joins the Secret Society, the Society actually battled the superhero team called the Freedom Fighters, and he successfully murders the human Bomb, which gains him a high-ranking position in the Society. But really, other than that, there's not much else regarding the New Earth version of Bizarro. I mean, there is one time where he did create his own Bizarro world underneath the blue sun, making a Bizarro Lois and all that, but really there's nothing else too interesting to talk about. So I'm just going to give my personal opinion on Bizarro. My opinion of Bizarro is that he's definitely one of the most important enemies of Superman, in the fact that Bizarro is not only a classic and unique enemy of Superman, but he also sort of single-handedly created an archetype of supervillains, which is the evil doppelganger, the imperfect clone, the retarded copy. Now, whenever people talk about an imperfect creation or an imperfect duplicate of a certain character, that character is often considered or labeled a Bizarro, and that sort of traces all the way back to this character, to, well, Bizarro, since he's a clone of the single most powerful hero on the planet. And so that alone makes him a decent enough match for Superman. And ever since Bizarro first created, that sort of created the whole trend of certain superhero type characters having arch enemies that were also very, very similar to them. Like Spider-Man having Venom, Batman having the Wrath or Prometheus, or, something like that. That's sort of what Bizarro was responsible for, and for that fact alone, I really like Bizarro. And he's also one of the more sympathetic out of Superman's rogues gallery, because in a sense, Bizarro is like a young kid or a wild animal. He's really not aware of the fact that he's doing bad things. He's simply being used by bad people to do bad things against his own will. Or maybe not against his own will, because he doesn't really know that he's doing bad things. He always thinks that he's doing good things. So that's what makes Bizarro interesting and very sympathetic. So yeah, this has been my Supervillains Explored entry on Bizarro, and for my 50th episode, which will be the next video, I got a very, very, very big character planned for that one. So you don't want to miss that. So stay tuned for the 50th Supervillains Explored episode, where I will tackle a villain that I think everybody should be quite well familiar with. See you guys later.